Hi everyone, here's a short video on cyberbullying, violence, and digital citizenship. So we know, as we've discussed in this class, that youth can be vulnerable online. They can be potentially preyed upon by offenders such as bullies or sex offenders or traffickers, because let's be honest, the internet is a space that where people can easily access others, including youth, and it is possible to affect people, to contact people anonymously. So this makes predators much harder to catch. There are also issues with privacy, where children's privacy is at stake, and they're vulnerable to hacking, to fraud, and so on. So thinking about, for instance, fraudulent activity like having them like clickbait. There are different dimensions of risk that the UNICEF explores, one related to content, where children are exposed to unwelcome and inappropriate content, such as pop-ups might come to mind. There's also issues with contact. So some children could participate in risky communication if they're in spaces where people can chat, like Twitch, the online gaming platform. And then finally, there's conduct. So there is a dimension of risk if young people are using digital technologies in ways that put them in harm's way, such as, for instance, if they're sending out pictures that could be used in a harmful way against them. One of the ways that young people are potentially at risk of being harmed is obviously through cyberbullying, which might be something familiar to many of you, especially the teachers. The Quebec government defines it as a form of bullying that occurs via digital platforms like social networks or via online games or through text messages. And acts of cyberbullying can include denigration, isolation, insults, rumors, or threats against someone. These acts can be direct or indirect, with the perpetrators known or anonymous. So, some victims can be texted directly or can see, for instance, comments about them in Snapchat or other platforms or WhatsApp. Sometimes they can know who is affecting them, and other times they are vulnerable to strangers or to people who are anonymously posting materials against them. We know that cyberbullying is a problem in Quebec. If you're curious about this, you can read Shaheen Sharif's work. So she's a professor at McGill, and she works, her project is Define a Line, and she did a study on cyberbullying. This might have been 5 to 10 years ago. Her work, in her work days, they spoke to over 1,000 children and teens, and they found, for instance, as we see here, that while young people do recognize that their actions can be harmful, there are a number of excuses that would lead them to post or to act in harmful ways anyways. There's also, her work also shed this an interesting light on perceptions of cyberbullying. For instance, here is one example where we see that in the participants ages 13 to 18, 61% of them engaged in cyberbullying or justified cyberbullying as being meant as a joke, harmless fun. So it's food for thought. I'm going to skip this. Cyberbullying falls under the umbrella of bullying in general, but it is slightly different because when we think of bullying that occurs digitally through technologies, we know that because of the pervasiveness of technology and digital media, it's so much harder to escape. So emails and chat posts can arrive at any time, day or night. So in a way, it's less controlled than traditional offline bullying that might occur in schools or within certain contexts. The quote here that you see on the slide says, "No such safe haven exists for children in the digital world." Online bullying also is very easily spreadable amongst peers and communities. And it really can inflict reputational harm, particularly, as we know, because online content is so much harder to erase and can follow someone for the rest of their lives. The impact on victims is there are many different types of impact. Victims of cyberbullying can be more likely to use alcohol and drugs, more likely to not attend school, to experience in-person bullying, to receive poor grades, to experience low self-esteem, to experience more health problems than others, and can experience thoughts of suicide, or victims of cyberbullying can eventually decide to commit suicide. Children who are most vulnerable offline are likely to be the most vulnerable online as well. They also report more harm being felt. The most vulnerable groups in research, the most vulnerable groups that we find are girls, children from poor households, children communities with limited understandings of different forms of sexual abuse and exploitation of children, children who are out of schools with disabilities, who self-identify as LGBTQ, who suffer depression or mental health problems, and who are children from marginalized groups. So there are several, evidently there are several vulnerable groups. Technology facilitated sexual violence is also an issue that young people might face online. And obviously it is very similar to cyberbullying in a way that it consists of an array of abusive behaviors that involve technology. These behaviors, so there's different dimensions here that the authors Henry and Powell kind of propose. They're looking at this through a policy lens. So these dimensions might overlap, but it is generally, they're divided here in 5 sections based on how they're addressed by the law. So we know technology facilitates sexual violence can consist of online sexual harassment, is gender and sexuality based harassment specifically, can consist of cyber stalking, image-based sexual exploitation, and involves the use of a carriage service to perpetuate an assault or to coerce an unwanted sexual experience. You'll see here in point 4, it says image-based sexual exploitation. Many of you may have heard of revenge porn, but you see here how there's different terminology. This is a more appropriate term. Revenge porn carries this victim-blaming connotation, implying that there was something the victim did to deserve revenge. The porn implies a commercialization of sexual images and also raises questions around pornography, and that can actually compromise legal sex work. So the image-based sexual exploitation might be a better term sometimes. Schools do have policy in place, well, in Quebec, under Bill 56, an act to prevent and stop bullying and violence in schools. Schools are mandated to define, to have an anti-bullying and violence plans in place. The Bill 56 helps to define cyberbullying and what it looks like to teachers, for teachers and administrators to recognize it, and also assign sort of stakeholder responsibilities so that, you know, principals know what they have to do, teachers know what they have to do, youth and parents know what they have to do to respond to incidents. Schools are encouraged to build relationships with the police force in their area and are required to report incidents and how they were handled. So it provides, Bill 56 calls for schools to be accountable. So some elements here of digital citizenship, which because of this is supposed to be a short video, I can't explore each in depth, but I recommend that you check out the link that is in the notes of this PowerPoint. So from Digital Citizenship Quebec, these are several elements that that, similar to digital literacy, can help young people be better equipped with knowledge and skills to navigate digital platforms. So you see information literacy at the bottom left of the corner is similar to digital literacy in a way. But you'll see it goes beyond being able to critique and produce online content to being able to understand what safety looks like online. How a digital footprint works and what young people can do to make sure it's healthy and positive. Digital citizenship involves teaching kids about well-being and making those relationships and ties with their engagement with technology. Teaching them about copyright and plagiarism and being able to use online content in ways that are responsible. And being able to understand advertising and commerce as it occurs online. Digital citizenship also involves understanding the law and rights and responsibility as it relates to digital technologies. So for instance, when we're teaching young people about sexting, so about the sharing of intimate pictures. So for adults, sexting is legal, although it can have potential harmful implications. But for people under 18, it is not. So if you check out kidshelpful.ca, you can get more details on how on the relationship between law and sexting and children under 18. This is a framework that you can use when you're thinking about teaching digital citizenship. You're really aiming to teach young people to be safe, savvy, and social, to be able to protect themselves as digital citizens, to be able to be educated digital citizens, and to be able to respect themselves and others. The Ribble link here is really awesome. I encourage you to go check it out. The Quebec government, so the Ministry of Education, sorry, has materials that teachers can use. So here's from B Cyberpool, some information about netiquette. Here is some do's and don'ts for cyberspace. I know privacy is always a concern, so addressing this with kids is really important. This would be useful for many of you who were thinking throughout this course, we're reflecting on dissemination online and having young people produce materials in the class that would then go on social media. And I know many of you are really concerned about this with good reason. So, you know, this resource is only one of many that can offer you some advice if you want to have a classroom social media page, or if you want to produce and disseminate content online with your classroom. I would always advise, you know, if you are going to post, let's say, digital storytelling videos or photo voice, post on a moderated website on a classroom account, disable comments, make sure you have permissions and you're aware of whether you're allowed to do it with your school and with the parents. And always avoid student faces and student names. Here are some resources if you're interested in learning about this further. There's some videos, toolkits here, and this is important for, especially if you want to disseminate to your kids or to your students where to go if they need help. These are good resources. I hope this was helpful. Okay. Have a good one.